Hi everyone, welcome to Demon Folklorist. I'm Victoria J, and you guessed it, I am the Demon Folklorist. This will be a folklore and horror movie episode since I'll be talking about urban legends and then the horror movie series Urban Legends. After doing some research on the internet, I'm realizing most people don't actually know what an urban legend is. So no wonder my students had a hard time finding one back when I was teaching. So, an urban legend is a story that could have potentially happened, but it's just too good to be true. It's almost always told as a friend of a friend, or fofs, as folklorists refer to them. The friend, though, is a lot farther than anybody realizes because nobody can trace it. And this is because it didn't happen. But it is told as a true story with very weird events. The setting is, in reality, a normal place. These things could happen, but probably didn't. So, literally, every bit of the story is important. There's nothing extraneous, and it focuses on the conclusion. So, that's another marker of the urban legend. It's too polished, it's too perfect, it's too neatly plotted. Through oral repetition and variation comes in folklore. These stories even make the news and are often told again as pure truth, with consistent themes and narrative cores. The tales do get recycled and revised, though, to fit the times. It doesn't matter if it happened in folklore. We call that the story is true, because stories are told as true even if they completely aren't. So, to the study of folklore, it does not matter if it was true. I'm aware that folklorists consider the term urban legend outdated, but I'm going to be honest, I don't care. The public understands what I mean when I say urban legend, as opposed to the more consistent umbrella term of legends. But I don't think that's correct. At least it doesn't sound correct to me, because legends imply the distant past for whatever reason. They may not always happen in urban areas. I like the term and I will be using it. So please, folklorists, don't come after me just because I use this outdated term. I've always disagreed about it, and I will not be taking comments or questions about it ever. A lot of urban legends are like, if you hang out in certain places as a woman, you'll get dead. And that commentary is brought to you by my sister, who unfortunately could not be here. Or like with true crime TV, how it's always like they're saying, don't go to college, don't get married, and definitely don't leave the house ever. And that's how you'll be safe. We also have the killer in the back seat. Most people check the back seat to this day because of this one. I check it when I happen to remember. I even had a student once who had somebody crouched in her back seat. Luckily, she saw him and called the police. She didn't even get into the car. She just saw he was back there. Now, this is different from a faux narrative because it happened to her, and that's called a memorot. You can generally trust that memorots are true because they happen to that person. With the babysitter urban legend, you can't really even talk about urban legends and not talk about the babysitter. It is the most pervasive urban legend that exists, probably because it's still applicable. And there are the same fears around women being independent for the first time, being responsible for another person's children, fears of being left alone and in charge. I even had a student who had a version of this happen to her without the call is coming from inside the house thing. That isn't a real thing because phone lines don't work that way. Or it has something to do with cops being not able to actually trace the call if it is coming from inside the house. So that's just sort of a fun detail. That's how you know this is a babysitter story. But anyway, so this student had this guy, escaped crazy guy, just break into the house. I'm not sure if he was out of prison or from a mental institution, but he got into the house and she was able to figure that out, get the kids out safely, and call the cops. So that's a real life version of this story. It goes to show you that these stories persist for specific reasons. They're plausible. This could totally happen to you. And this is actually based on a real murder of Jeanette Crispin. There is a reason that this keeps happening. He was strangled, unfortunately, and I don't believe anything happened to the children. We also have needles being infected with HIV back when people were super scared about it, but they didn't have a lot of information. So whatever the current crisis is, there was probably a COVID variation of this one. Somebody injected other people in clubs with COVID back when we had no idea what this was, and the pandemic had just started. People fear the unpredictability of others and their own safety in public we have this, what I call the Joker factor. Maybe a deeply disturbed individual who wants to watch the world burn. This could also be a response to the dangerousness of the world we live in and the inability to truly keep ourselves safe. The HIV needles one reemerged without the needle. And I heard about this online, that if you touch fentanyl-laced tissues or dollar bills, it'll cause people to overdose, which isn't true. But this is a new version of this tale because we have just the mere acting of touching something innocent causing overdoses, which, usually translates into a moral panic. And moral panics are when people become afraid for their children due to an overblown fear that may or may not be real. So a newer one was Slender Man. This came from a creepypasta that somebody had created online. I know this one. I think it's like Victor Surge. That's what his name is. And he had entered a photo into a contest, and it was just an edited photo of the Slender Man, and kids were like running away from him. It was cool. And soon the Slender Man mythos was created online, and it was created purely online. Eventually it started to translate into the real world, and unfortunately there was a crime where these two mentally ill girls stabbed their classmates several times, and luckily she's still alive and she's okay. I don't really follow true crime, but it is a good example of the way that moral panics have a basis in reality of this fear. Like, these two girls really thought he was real and they were acting as his proxy in hurting another classmate. Another one is the checking of the Halloween candy. So the reason for this was an actual dude who poisoned his own child for insurance purposes. But he effectively ruined Halloween for generations. Now, I'm not super young, I'm nearing 30, but my parents were still actively checking my candy when I was a kid. And then when I asked my 18 and 19-year-old students if they'd ever heard of this, almost nobody had. So it looks like it's finally starting to die out. There were things like in Bob's Burgers, I saw one that was like Johnny's razor blade apples or something, or Johnny's totally normal candy store, and it had something with razor blades in there. And that's what they're referencing. The fact that not only were people afraid that people were poisoning their children, possibly with open candy wrappers or maybe sticking a needle in there, that razor blades were in there and that if their child swallowed it, they would die. It's like that Joker factor. And that man who did this, Ronald Clark O'Brien, he died in 1984, and he was actually called the Candyman. So the 1992 version of Candyman and then the 2021 version used this razor blades in the candy mythos for the Candyman, who is not real. At least not the one where you say Candyman 5 times in the mirror. He is an invention just for film. But he's such a convincing one that people walked away from the 2021 Candyman and were talking online about how this is totally real. If you do this, he'll show up and he'll gut you. And it's fascinating how if a story feels true, we tell it as true, even if it is kind of crazy. Like the Candyman showing up in the mirror. But is it any crazier than Bloody Mary showing up in the mirror? I don't know. Bloody Mary is alive and well. And while there's still mirrors and sleepovers, there will always be kids who are playing Bloody Mary. I played it as a kid, although I was not going to go anywhere near a mirror. I've already had way too many supernatural instances in my life, and I was just like, yeah, you guys can play, but I am not going near that mirror. Even then, I was kind of like, mirrors feel like a bad time, guys. Anyway, a lot of urban legends die out because science either debunks it or that information reaches the public to the point that they realize their own fear was a little bit stupid. There was one called the kidney heist, and it's a stranger taking you out on a date, drugging you, and then you wake up in a bathtub full of ice and a big sewn up cut on your side, and they took one of your kidneys. And it's like, no, that's not how organ transplant works. But they get overblown and then they die out. Kind of like conspiracy theories, if you think about it. Like, there's no evidence to suggest that this should be a real fear, but some of them continue to persist anyway, all the way back from the 50s, because there's something in society that is still unsafe around that subject. We also have the hook, which is about premarital sex fears from parents. You have this new independence with cars, And also this kind of like fear of the woods. So the hook is the one where the girl and the guy are either making out or having sex, whatever, and they get these warnings on the radio about being out late, that somebody's out there, like some crazy guy who either escaped from prison, or he escaped from a mental institution. So if you think about like Cropsey, which is more of an East Coast fear, the escaped mental patient finds you wherever, and he's living in abandoned buildings. They are in the car and they hear about this guy and they're like, maybe we should go home now. And then they see a hook outside their door, and that's what the radio had told them, that he was a hook-handed man. This one is still routinely told. I believe it even came up in Supernatural, as did Bloody Mary. Supernatural's not really my bag, but, you know, no judgment. We also have the licked hand, or it's also called humans can lick too. A girl has a dog under her bed, meaning that everything's okay because he gives her a lick, and then one night she finds a bloody knife in the sink. She checks the dog, and on the dog is written, humans can lick too, or it's written on the wall. It depends on the story. It's a particularly gruesome one. Like, who would do this? But even though this one's not routinely told anymore, it is kind of still a preeminent fear that a woman comes home and something's happened to her animal because some psycho got into her apartment. Another one I heard was like, this lady went on a date with this guy and she started to feel woozy, so he took her home, and then she ended up waking up and he had clear plasticed, you know what I mean, like wrapped the stuff around her entire apartment. And the police were like, yeah, I don't think you really want to know what he was going to do to you. He was like going to Dexter you. So that's a newer version. The boyfriend's death was also popular in the 90s. So in this one, the guy gets out of the car to investigate like a noise while the girl listens to an eerie like scraping sound on top of the car. And what it means is that this crazy guy, I guess, like tied him up and hung him from this tree, and what she's hearing is his feet hitting the car. I don't know why that was a persistent fear in the 90s, but it was, and now we don't hear about that one. There's also the slasher under the car, so hiding under the car, slashing the lower leg and or the Achilles heel. I actually heard about this one in the early 2000s, and we still use cars. You would think this one would be told a little bit more, but oddly not. One that comes up in the movie Urban Legend is the death of little Mikey. He ate Pop Rocks and soda and he burst, and he was from a Life cereal commercial. This did not happen, as is told in the movie, because he's a successful executive in New York. He's alive. Not only that, I did hear about Pop Rocks and soda, but I also thought that was stupid. So I don't think I ever believed that one when I was a kid. Alligators in the sewers is another great one because it's pretty self-explanatory. Like, why not? Like, what if? It makes you think about, like, what are the possibilities of why would alligators be in the sewers? Would it be like baby alligators going down there? I wouldn't be surprised if Florida had them. Florida has a lot of things I've never seen before, but it could happen. You know, like snakes come out of people's toilets. Is it really so crazy that there could be alligators, or depending on your region, crocodiles in the sewers? I don't know. A baby could get down there, get so big, and then just hang out, because where are they going to go? How are they going to get out of there? The spider bite. So you get a boil, it's super painful, and then spiders erupt from it. I did hear about this one when I was younger, probably because of how popular Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark was. And it mentions several urban legends. So that was the way I kind of connected to it. But it was this weird fear. Nobody likes spiders. Also, I feel like you eat 8 or 9 spiders a year is an urban legend, because that's not true. That's like crazy. And a lot. That would be so many. But why are spiders crawling in your mouth? Why would they be doing that? Like, you're breathing. I don't think spiders would be like, yeah, this is a good time. Let's go down this person's throat, you know? But that is another spider one that was told as a fact. I had this planner that had a bunch of facts, and that was in there because urban legends are always told as true. One of my personal favorites from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is the poison dress one. So this is where a girl, she's a little bit poor and she can't really afford a fancy dress. So she goes to a thrift store or a pawn shop, I believe, and rents one. So she dies because she was perspiring during this dance she went to. And the dress had traces of formaldehyde. It was sold by a mortician who stole it from a funeral home because he was greedy and wanted the money for it, and it effectively poisoned her. Now, I don't really know much about formaldehyde. I worked in a funeral home for like a second, but don't think this is how that works. I don't think you die from it. I just don't think you die from it from like that small traces on the dress. But I think this one really resonated with me because it's a simple act, like putting on a dress and suddenly you are dead. So yeah, that one resonated with me, although it didn't really resonate with the class that they had asked me to, like, this was like 8th grade, right? And I had been asked like, oh, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, what's a good one? And I don't like the spotlight at all. And I was a really shy kid. So I picked this one. They were like, oh, that's lame. And I'm like, whatever, dude. Like, how would you feel if you had rented something and then you were just dead? I stand by my decision. It's scary. A funny one that was really popular in the 90s for some reason was that Richard Gere had put gerbils up his ass for, I'm guessing, a sexual purpose, but nothing about that. Like, you would not survive that. Let's just be honest. And why would you subject a poor animal to something like that? Like, ugh. But yeah, it was something that was going around, and it's even mentioned, I believe, in Scream. They mention it in there because that's how popular it was. It was also mentioned in Urban Legend, I believe. Then there's the Vanishing Hitchhiker. So very few urban legends involve the supernatural. But one of the most famous ones is like you pick up a hitchhiker only for them to disappear after giving a cryptic prophecy or something similar. But people really know that one. It came up a lot when I was teaching the Urban Legends unit, because my students would be like, oh, what about the Vanishing Hitchhiker? And I'm like, I'm surprised that one is still happening, especially like, I don't know about you, but I would not pick up a hitchhiker. And maybe that's like a woman thing, I don't know. But it just seems like a bad idea. We also have the railroad children handprint story where like kids were killed during a train accident. And they leave their handprints, or no, hold on. So this one is where if you put your car in neutral on the train tracks, the children, and you put like white powder on the back of your car so you can see the handprints. These children who died in this accident will push you over the train tracks. I've heard that one in several different towns. So it is probably nowhere near true. But it is a good story. I believe even Ghost Adventures and probably a few other shows as well went and investigated it. And at the time, I was like, how do you know this is the real story? That this is truly where this happened? Where are your sources? So, that's the folklorist in me talking before I ever became a folklorist. There's also the Gateway to Hell story. So every town I've lived in apparently has like a place that's the gateway to hell. It's like, well, I guess we're all in hell, aren't we? One of them that I heard when I was growing up. So there was a movie called Three Men and a Baby. And it had this urban legend that you could see a spirit on film. But it was actually like a cutout that had been propped up in the back of a scene accidentally of like a kid. And it grew pretty popular to the point where I was like reading about it in a book and I was like, I don't know, that one doesn't really ring true for me. But we all love this idea that you could actually pick up on something like that. Okay, so let's get into the Urban Legend movie. This movie takes place at an ultra East Coast school, and there's this urban legend that circulates every year. The Stanley Hall Massacre. An abnormal psych professor bangs on the doors of Stanley Hall. I guess he snapped. And anybody who answers is then gutted. For some reason, two of the main characters decide that saying Bloody Mary 3 times in front of Stanley Hall will do something. Like, you need a mirror, guys. I don't know why you thought this would work, but whatever. It was a weird piecing together of the folkloresque, which is a story that feels enough like folklore to be mistaken as folklore. So Stanley Hall's the folkloresque, and then they pieced in like Bloody Mary without the mirror and made it into its own thing for the movie. My sister, we were watching it together, and I was like, what the hell is that? That's not how this works. Like, I just get so mad when folklore's like incorrect. So the mirror is the central thing, though, to the Bloody Mary story. It kills me. Like, because if you're going to represent real folklore, just do it right. Just tell the real story, okay? Or at least a version of the real story. Don't get weird on me. In their class, in the movie, they're talking about folklore being a gauge for the values of society. But when I was watching the movie, I was like, it's not just about values. Though those get reinforced as well, folklore reflects us as a culture, our fears mostly, our desires, our taboos, etc. Microwaving pets and roasting kids in the oven by accident usually is one of the ones that is alluded to, I feel like, in 90s movies, because Candyman mentions this one, that like the babysitter or whoever was watching the kids is like high off their ass and they end up like roasting the kid like it's a turkey. And for some reason, people believed that. And it probably has to do with growing use of such things like ovens and microwaves and these new technologies. Because there's always anxiety when new stuff comes out. And then we unfortunately have a scene where the animal is killed because of the killer's ruthlessness. Of all the ways you could show on film that someone's a psycho, this is my least favorite trope, although we know no animals were actually hurt. It just feels so unnecessary when people are evil to pets. The killer, spoilers, honestly, like if at this point you don't realize that like my whole podcast and everything I write is about spoilers, like shame on you. But the killer turns out to be the main character's bestie, Brenda, whose love of her life was accidentally murdered by Natalie, who's the redhead, and a now murdered friend of hers, Michelle, because they were doing the gang high beam initiation. So flashing your high beam somehow equals gang members killing you. I don't know. It was a 90s thing. Anyway, it resulted in a car wreck, and Brenda didn't get over it and then came after them. And another great piece of commentary from my sister is that the power of revenge compels her. I don't know, I thought it was funny. This one wasn't actually an amazing movie, but it's a pretty good one-time watch. It has a lot of twists and turns, and you don't really see it coming who the real killer is. But that's because they're hiding information from us. Now, Urban Legend Final Cut is much different thing going on. So we have this weirdly shaped, cold, artsy school as the setting, and it feels like this series picks some of the most bland characters to be the leads. And then we have Reese, the security guard, being back, which is awesome. Eva Mendes is in this one, and she is a mouthy lesbian character. She's my favorite. This one is more general commentary, just because there were so many questionable points in this movie. Like, what is it with men resorting to calling someone little girl when they wish to demean them, when they're usually like right around the same age? It's like, is that supposed to intimidate me? I don't know. Men are weird. And then there's also a lot of jackets that get used. So there was a jacket that was used that was like a ski jacket, maybe, like the kind Clark Griswold was wearing one in Christmas Vacation. So it looks like that. It's the one that's got if you zip it up all the way, it's got the fur around your face, and then it's like a heavy ski coat. That came up in the first movie. That's what the killer would when he hacked people or killed them in some way. So I'm just kind of like, where are we getting these jackets from? Was this like super common in the 90s and the early 2000s? There's also this concept where, I don't know how it worked in the 90s and 2000s. I was still fairly young. I was like 6 to 10, actually. So I wasn't in college. But people are like, I have no money and I have no connections. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, welcome to everybody else. At least that's how it's operating now. Maybe back then it was a lot easier to make those connections. I don't know. People who went to school back then, you should weigh in and let me know, because I don't know how that was working. But when I got out of school, I didn't have money and I didn't have connections. I did escape without debt, though. So that's what gave me, I guess, even though I hated it. Also, the guy who was saying that he took it really hard that his film was given a C. And it's like, okay, why would you listen really to your teacher anyway about your art? Art is subjective. It's so subjective that keep trying to get it made. Like, crazy movies are made all the time, like Sharknado and, I don't know, what was the one? The Evil Bong, and, like, why not? It's going to appeal to somebody because you thought of it. What makes you think someone else won't like it? So don't listen to your teachers, guys. But when I say that, don't be producing, racist content, homophobic, transphobic, etc. content. If you are attacking a group of people, that is not good content. And seriously, stop listening if you're that type of person, because I'm not here for it. And then this movie was just not very good in general. The first one was all right, and then this one was just not good. But it turned out to be the teacher for some reason. I don't understand blind ambition to the point of murdering other people. It came up in The Babysitter Killer Queen, and I was just like, why? Why would you murder somebody for fame? That seems like it's not ambition, but psychosis. And then, why would you steal somebody's work when eventually people would assume that that was your work and you'd have to reproduce something? I've had writers where I loved this one book of theirs, and it was normally their first book. And then after that, it just declined. And I never liked a book from them again. I don't want to talk about who that was because this is somebody's work, and, I don't want to defame them, be like, oh, someone else wrote your first book. And dude, if you were really going to pass this off as your own, don't you think someone's going to notice? Anyway, that's just me. The last part of the movie just felt really unnecessary. It just didn't need to be. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Demon Folklorist.